So our scripture passage today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Stay on this slide until I ask you to turn it. I guess this is why I've been nervous. I don't tell this story very often. I've felt a little out of sorts this morning. When Ailey was 2, we moved from Alabama to Oregon. We moved to Ontario, Oregon. And that was the biggest decision John and I have ever made. Those of you who have made the big move across country, you know it's a really hard one. But we knew one person west of the Mississippi River, one. And that was it. And so it was really, really hard. When we got to Ontario, I had a church, I had a whole community of people to get to know. I had a good job. John had a good job. Ailey was delightfully too. So life should have been really good. That first year there was the hardest year of my life. I just could not get used to it. I could not get used to the horizon. I know that sounds really like a small thing, but I could not get used to the horizon being different to what I was raised with in Alabama. It was every little detail of life was so different than the South. And so I struggled. I deeply struggled that year. And there was one day that I was driving to the busiest intersection in Ontario. If you know Ontario, there's not many. But it happened to be a busy time of the day, and I remember thinking, if I just pull right on out, it will be over. If I just pull on out into this traffic, it could be over. Like I said, it really was a hard year. Even though my life had all the wonderful parts in it, if I had lived awake to that, I had a time that I was really down and more than depressed. I considered suicide. So I went that very same day and called the doctor because it shocked me. Called the doctor, made an appointment for the next day, and started on a different path. It took a very long time. I can tell you now, I am as happy as I've ever been. Not that I don't live with a lot of stress. I do. But I am really happy. But that was some dark time. And I never forget it. That I can go that low, that I can be that depressed and that down. So I work hard to not go that path, remembering the wonderful things of my life. But today I wanted us to talk about the opposite of hope. This month we've talked about hope all month long. And so the absolute opposite of hope is hopelessness. Hopelessness, that nothingness, that desire for nothing. Wouldn't it be great if I had nothing? Hopelessness. I know that this sermon will make mistakes. You cannot talk about suicide and not make mistakes. So I go ahead and apologize for how I might make mistakes, this might fall short from what you need to hear. So I just know that. Just want to say that ahead of time. And it might not seem like enough. I want you to be prepared for that. And the vastness of hopelessness, it's hard to match it with a word of hope. So that sometimes doesn't feel like the same equal balance. I just want you to be aware that for some of you, you might hear it that way. That that's not really enough to get me out of the hole. You know, I'm prepared for you to feel that way and know that for some people it might be that way. And I know that this is a part of people's lives right now because recently we received an email from Medford City School that a lot of high schoolers are watching a show called 13 Reasons Why. Perhaps you've heard about it. Perhaps you got that email as well. It's a very present topic, suicide. So I just wanted us to invite that conversation into worship. I dare say that every single one of us have had some connection to suicide. Either it's a thought that you have had of your own life, either it's a relative or a friend, a classmate, some connection in your life, if no other than a celebrity that you watched on the news that took their own life. There's no one in this room that has not been connected in some small way to someone taking their life. And so when I opened the Bible to ask, so what can the Bible say about this very present issue in our modern age? What can the Bible say? So the passage I chose, it really doesn't have anything to do with someone taking their life. But there are a couple of stories in the Bible of suicide, and I did not read them, but I am going to just slightly share their stories, just to show you how different situations suicide can take. The first one I want to tell you about is King Saul. Perhaps you remember that King Saul took his own life. He was fighting the Philistines, and there was already a wind of David being a great hero, and so he was already seeing the decline of his kingdom. The Philistines were coming in, and they were a mighty army, and they actually killed his son, Jonathan, and so things were not going well on the battlefield at all, and he could just see the decline of all of his power. And so he asked his guard next to him, hold the sword and let me fall on it. And the guard was like, no, I'm not going to participate in that. And so he managed to do it himself and kill himself. So it's really about being humiliated and not wanting to see the loss of his power, knowing that David was on the rise. Just a lot of things in that story, very unique story. And then there's Judas. That's another character in the Bible that committed suicide. And he hung himself after he, in the Garden of Eden, kissed Jesus to acknowledge the presence of Jesus to the guards. Now, the kiss was to identify who Jesus was. And he was paid to do this, to mark him out so that they could come and arrest him and take him away. to be to be put on the cross. And so some people have imagined or have wondered if James did this so that Jesus would have the perfect atmosphere to really become the king that Judas hoped he would be. In that critical moment, Jesus would step out and become the king. And so some people have wondered if Judas was not doing a heroic thing by setting the correct stage. But after seeing that that was not what Jesus was going to become, at least in the kind of traditional king image that Judas had in mind, but instead he was going to end up on the cross, he turned around and gave his money back and hung himself in disappointment. So 2 stories of suicide in the Bible, really the most prevalent ones, and they're really quite strikingly different. Really, really different. One's out of guilt, one's out of loss of power, really, really different. But that just shows you that every path to someone taking their life is specific to that particular life. So no message that I can give is going to give for everyone the right solution, because it's really, really unique. We had a very lucky case in this church of matching exactly what someone needed. It doesn't happen all the time, and I don't know if the sermon will either, but we have in this church met exactly what someone needed. When our shelter was open, we had someone that attempted to take their life, overdosed, drugged up, and then walked into the shelter to spend the night. The wonderful thing is, because there were so many people around, they knew something was wrong with him. And so they called emergency services, and he was taken, and his life was saved. And he said afterwards, I was trying to kill myself, but I wondered if y'all might help me. So he walked into our building, and we happened to have exactly what he needed. So exactly what someone needs is unique to each and every person. So that's why this passage is really beautiful to me. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens. Does that sound like something else that's not in the Bible? Does that sound like the Statue of Liberty? Does that remind you of that? Give me your tired, your poor, and your huddled masses. Anyway, for some reason this passage reminded me of that. That's just a thing in there for you to. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Now, I want to warn you one thing about this passage. The rest that this passage is talking about is not the grave. The rest that this passage is talking about is God's desire to take our burden on also. How do I know that that is the case? It's the next line, because he talks about the yoke. I'm going to help you. I'm going to be there with you, but it's going to be some work. A yoke is a wooden contraption that goes over two animals, 2 bulls or whatever, that are pulling a load, and they both are strapped in together, and they carry the load together. So that's what God is going to do. Not put you to sleep, not put you in the grave, but put you to work, but alongside God. God carrying the load with you. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. For the hopeless, a message that things can be better, that you are not alone, that God longs to be exactly where you are in your unique situation and carry it with you to lighten your load, get through that day that's really difficult, get through that period that's hard by sharing God's burden. Not your own, but sharing God's burden. A lighter load. So we started this month off with the definition of hope that my son gave me. He said, hope is believing that everything is going to be okay. Hope is believing that everything is going to be okay. I want us to end with a slightly different definition. Okay, Ailey? Hope is being able to see there is light despite all the darkness. If you have thoughts of killing yourself, there are hotlines, there are resources for you, and your soul can know God and God's assistance. If you know someone in your life that is experiencing this, you can be a light to them if they so choose to receive it. If you are carrying a load of a loss of someone else, this can be a light also. A hope that you can live your own life in spite of what someone else has chosen to do. See, there's so many parts to someone that has died from suicide that I know I am missing a piece of what you might need. But know that God knows. When we carry God's agenda, God's yoke, we feel hopeful, we feel connected, we feel not alone, and we have this light despite all the darkness that is possible. Let us read this definition together as closing. Hope is being able to see there is light despite all the darkness. Amen.